Welcome back to the 40% Better podcast, where we talk about all things leadership, specifically in the technology world, but you can apply it anywhere. And today, Bryan O'Neill has graciously, despite the holidays coming up, um, uh, said yes to our request for him to be here. So thank you very much, and welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks. It's good to be here, Bill. Looking forward to it.
Thank you, thank you. So the question that I kind of the one really scripted question that I have that I start these off with is, how did you get started doing the leadership thing? Was it a thing you started doing as a kid? Because you were in sports,
Yeah.
or you just got dropped into it all of a sudden when you were 25? Like, how'd that play out?
Yeah, I mean that's a good question. Somebody earlier on in my career pointed out to me that I had been a leader for a lot of my life. When I was younger, involved in sports, I was at a school we played rugby in Scotland where I grew up, and I was a captain of one of the rugby teams there. So I was kind of somewhat familiar with. Um, what those characteristics of leadership were like from a pretty early age. Um, Always had experience of working with good leaders, or being around leaders at the school that I went to. Seeing the way that my parents acted, either in their own professions, or with me and my family, and then from a professional perspective. Um, Years ago, my very first job at a little company's not around anymore in London, CB Business Systems, Cortex Computer Systems. I was picked out very early on to be a leader of their engineering teams. I guess they saw something in me. I've always been quite outspoken. I've never been shy about speaking up. I think that was one of the things early on that probably earmarked me as somebody that could potentially lead teams and eventually lead departments.
Nice. That's awesome. I'm always, I guess, maybe a little inspired's the right word. I guess when I hear about people that, they've got that sports background, and pardon me, I've got to mute my phone. Um, because it seems like it's a very consistent thread where people that grew up in sports and they had some kind of leadership um, perspective there, it translates really well into business. So yeah, um, I like hearing that. Yeah, it's very cool. And I think one of the aspects of that for me anyway, I grew up semi-competitively, um, is the coachability. Like, you learn to be coached. You learn, it's just like normal, right? And I find that people who don't grow up in that environment, it's a little bit harder mental transition to, like you mentioned, having good leaders of your own, right? And I think when you grow up in sports, you get used to like
Yeah.
taking knowledge from other people, hearing their perspectives. I certainly looked at the swimmers that were better than me and was like, what are they doing? Like, how do I look at them as role models, right? And I think sports is a really good uh, preparation for that.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, there's something there about, the deep thought process, or, really trying to analyze the feedback and the direction that you're given, and figuring out how best to pass that on to others. I mean, that's a big differentiator, I think, with you know, people that you want in your organization that are good performers, are really people that are capable of analyzing the instruction, understanding the motivation behind it, rather than just, following exactly to the letter the instruction that's been given. Really trying to understand what you're being told is kind of a key aspect of that. And if you've got a good coach, that's kind of part of their job, is to get that message over to you in a way that that resonates and forces you to think it through rather than just rote follow instructions.
Right. Yeah. 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 It's critical thinking.
Right.
That's
That's
the
right.
yeah. That's kind of the the underlying skill set is being able to do that. Is that? Do you think like have you trained people on that, or what are the inputs to help people improve that skill set?
Um, I'll say that I've coached people on some of those techniques. I had some fantastic leaders when I was, coming up through my career, and trying to pass on some of the information that they had passed on to me, and some of the techniques that we've used is a key part of what I try and do um, with the folks that work for me. One technique in particular was, the idea of empathy mapping. I worked for a fantastic lady when I worked at Anheuser-Busch called Andrea Raver, and she introduced me to the technique of trying to empathy map, your stakeholders, try and understand their various perspectives is going to make you much more prepared in the way that you deliver information. So
Yeah.
the most obvious example is if you're going into a meeting and you've got to communicate some information and one of the stakeholders is going to be the chief financial officer, for example, you can anticipate that that person is going to ask you financial based questions about whatever the materials are that you're presenting, so you can think through those techniques, and that makes you number one a much better communicator because you're trying to anticipate what might be asked when you're giving a presentation, and it means that you are you're much more likely to be able to respond to any questions that do come up. So I mean that's kind of a technique I think that I was coached on fairly early on that I try to pass on to others that work for me.
I like that. Yeah, and I've never heard that called empathy map before. That's interesting. Yeah, I learned
It's
yeah.
it's
It's
kind of it's not a great word. People are somewhat reluctant to talk about empathy these days, but it really that's what it means. Put
yeah,
yourselves in the shoes of someone else and try and understand how are they going to receive the information that you're trying to
yeah, yeah, yeah. That's I think uh along like early in my career, the company that I was at had sales training for everybody in the company, software engineers, like everybody got it, right? No matter
yeah,
what. Um, and what they talked about there, which in my head seems very, very similar, is this idea of understanding people's success metrics,
yeah,
like what makes them successful or not, like, what's their desire, what's their fear, um, and how to communicate at different levels of the organization based on that, right? And it sounds very much like what you're
yeah.
talking about, is what are they looking for? And that's I think that's one of those communication techniques that needs more, um it it needs a lot more conversation and focus in organizations, um, because I think too often people just walk into meetings and they talk about whatever, right?
Yeah.
And it's always through their own lens, and they're not really paying attention to what the audience is looking for
Yeah.
so much. And and my experience has been that once you start paying attention to what the audience wants, it
Yeah.
makes all the conversations way easier.
Yeah, and again, once you get to know your stakeholders, you can anticipate what their perspective is going to
Yeah,
be and try and make sure that you're, I mean, that raises confidence in them that you're doing what needs to be done. And,
yeah,
it improves your, like you say, your critical thinking because you're really trying to think of a problem or a situation from as many different perspectives as you can,
right.
which is only going to make you better.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think that's such an underappreciated, um skill set to be able to do that. Yeah, I really like that. Yeah. Is that something that, like, do you guys have a system for training folks on your teams how to do that?
No, I work at Form Assembly. We're quite small, and we do encourage learning and growth, but not there's not really a formal method of teaching that. Years ago, um, as you can probably see, I'm a big reader. Um, I read the book, The Seven Habits, Dr.
Mhm.
Stephen Covey, and I didn't realize, but there's actually also a training course that I don't know. This was a long, long time ago now. I don't know if they still have the training course on that book these days, but I got the chance to go along to that training session over the course of a few days, and learned more deeply about some of the techniques that were being taught. But that was a much bigger organization. What we do within our engineering teams here at Form Assembly is kind of three things to try and ensure that our engineers are growing. Number one, we try to send people to as many conferences as we can. So if there's a cool conference coming up that somebody knows about, we'll try and find the dollars to support them going to the conference. That leads into the second part is we have a weekly, or sorry, a bi-weekly engineering-led learning session. So anyone from our engineering teams can come in on a Friday morning and run a learning session for, I think it's about 45 minutes. We have those sessions and teach the rest of the engineering team anything. A lot of times that's based on something that they've gone to a conference and been exposed to or learned. Could be something that they just knew outside of Form Assembly, maybe that they had previously done at some other place. And then the other thing that we do around learning and growth is we have a community of practice for engineering, which is basically engineers getting together and talking about things that they regard as important to the practice of engineering at Form Assembly. And that's more of a facilitated session of very short, focused conversations where the guys can propose a topic. They discuss it for 5 minutes. I think we call it a lean coffee, and then after 5 minutes, you can vote to continue the conversation. Extend it for 5 more minutes, end it and move on to something else. If we end it and move on to something else, then it's usually there's a proposal for some action as a result of the conversation. So, I mean, all of those things we do to try and promote growth in engineering. But in terms of specific leadership style training, we're a little bit small for that at the moment. But that'll probably be something that we will hopefully grow into at some point in the future. But
Yeah,
we have many good leaders that we've hired from elsewhere that are very capable of coaching our
nice.
engineering teams and helping them grow. But there's no formal leadership training here.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, it's always, I'm always curious, like, what people, like, how people do it, and what's their process. Just because I think about systems all the time, like,
Mhm.
that's kind of the, you know, the operating system in the back of my head is all systems focused. Even when I'm in a new context, right? Like, I know that in the back of my head, I'm like, "Oh, how do I systematize this?" Right? How do I get better at this, and then teach other people how to do it in a way that's
Yeah.
consistent and repeatable,
Yeah.
Um, and, and how do I abstract things in from other contexts so that I don't have to learn everything from scratch? Um, and, I think I have to credit programming for that,
Yeah.
because after I learned my first database, like, I remember the second database that I learned, I was like, "Wait a minute, this is, like, so much what's the big deal?" Um, and because the second database I learned was Oracle,
Yeah.
and the first one was this tiny database called Butler
Yeah.
that they've long since, disappeared, right? And, I remember, starting to get into Oracle, and being like, "This," like, other people were like, a bunch of other people that I was talking with, it was like, I guess their first database,
Hmm.
and everybody was kind of freaking out about it, and I was like, "This is actually not that big a deal." It's like 90% stuff that I already know, and this little tiny additional piece is actually quite easy, It's like not a
Right.
big deal. Yeah, it's and I think everything I try to apply that now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. It's similar to there's a great book released in I think it was 1994 called Design Patterns, but it was really the first time people had formalized these concepts that were repeatable and were being done across the industry. And it was like,
Yeah.
you suddenly come to the realization, wow, I'm not the first or only person to do these things. These are the things that are being done at scale
Yeah.
across the entire industry. So that was quite reaffirming. Yeah, it sounds like you similar experience with Butler and Oracle.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and I think since then, like, th that was one of those kind of transformational thinking, um, moments in my head. It was like, "Oh," and, like, every other company I've ever worked at, it's like, the first thing I've looked at is what's the data model, you
Yeah,
know? And then everything comes out of there, I'm like,
yeah,
"Okay, somebody was thinking a particular way, and here's how the data is structured," and, um, that's kinda my own cheat code for understanding how they build everything, and
right.
like, "Oh, this is why you did this. Okay, got it. Now it makes sense." Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's fun. Um, when when you're thinking about and, past experience or current or whatever,
Mhm,
um, like, in terms of recruiting, like, what are the things you're looking for when you're hiring people
mhm,
to see that they've got good potential
yeah.
to be team leads?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing that I look for, really, the two biggest things are, strong communication skills. Someone that can really, string a few sentences together, create a narrative around their own experience and the techniques that they've employed and how that's been successful or otherwise. A lot of people, it's sometimes good to hear people talk about things that they tried that didn't work. That's often a good indication. And then, the other thing is that you've really got to be looking for people that have the growth mindset, who really understand that um, everyone has unlimited potential. I mean, if there's one thing that we've seen over the last, I mean, I've been doing this for 35 plus years now. Um, the tech that we're using today isn't going to be the same as the tech that we're using in the future. The techniques that we use today aren't going to be the same as the techniques that we use in the future. I mean, goodness, just over the course of the last year, the number of changes that we've seen, never mind over the course of the last 35 years, you draw a line. We're not nearing the finish line of anything, or we're not about to top out in terms of advances in innovation or even techniques. So talking about AI, if you're recruiting somebody that has exposure to different artificial intelligence techniques to augment whatever role that they're doing, not just engineering, leadership or customer service, whatever it might be. Those are some of the things that you're looking for people to be exposed to. But the idea that we don't necessarily always know what the future is going to hold, but you're going to make sure that you're involved and engaged in whatever that might be, technology or process or whatever it might be. That's a key thing that a lot of times you can have those conversations as part of the recruiting process to try and make sure, yeah, this is a person who we can hire, bring on board, and he will help us grow along, or his or her grow along with the rest of the company. So, I mean, that's a key aspect that we try and look for when we recruit. Is do you have that growth mindset?
Nice. Yeah. Yeah, I think maybe I've just been super lucky, because it seems like I've always and maybe it's just this that there's some unconscious way I'm asking questions where I'm trying to figure out growth mindset. even before I knew that term.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, you're right. It's the stuff moves fast, you know, and you, you got to be able to figure out where and how, and you know, and also to a degree, look at things and go like, okay, that looks like an interesting idea, but I'm not quite sure how the heck we're going to really take advantage of it.
Right.
Let's give it 5 minutes to mature
Yeah.
a little bit, and then see if it's going to really, if it's going to really pan out, or not, depending on what's going on.
Absolutely.
Um, you know, I'm sure there's plenty of different technology things that over the years you've seen pop up, and seems like there's a great idea for and then it disappears because it
Yeah.
just doesn't play out in the real world.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I'm a huge proponent of growth mindset, and
Hmm.
and feeding people's curiosity, and really kind of finding ways um, to get people to be more invested in that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. And that's one of the things that we love about sending people to conferences. They'll get exposed to things that they've maybe never seen before and come
right.
back enthused and, able to talk about it to other people. And, when people come to me and they say, "Hey, Brian, I've heard about this conference, would you be able to pay our fees so that we could go pay our travel, whatever it might be?" And, 99 times out of 100, we say yes, because we know that's an investment in that person that the person is trying to make in themselves, which is a great sign. But it's also an investment that we'll get back because they'll come
Yeah,
back from that conference with more information to share with their peers and their colleagues about the new techniques that we've learned. Um, Went to a fantastic conference earlier on this year in Atlanta. I'll give it a big shout out. Render ATL, that's is run by a former colleague of mine, Justin Samuels, and it was just, I got to say, it was one of the best conferences I think I'd ever been to. But the thing that made it so good is that there were so many artificial intelligence practitioners, so many people demonstrating the techniques they were using for AI assisted engineering live on a stage. I think for some of the folks that we took there, that was a bit of an eye opener, because it definitely felt as if it was one of those things that was being more talked about than really being practiced. But when we saw these other companies really demonstrating those techniques, it changed the way that we operated here, quite honestly. And that the folks that we brought along to the conference were some of the people that we planted around the org, and they helped grow that movement a little bit more here. So absolutely recommend to any of your listeners, if they're looking for conferences to go to, Render ETL, which I think next year is going to be in August in Atlanta, is a really, really good one to put on your calendar. It's a very engineering led, which I always think, when you get grassroots led organizations or structures, they're always going to deliver a lot more value. And it's always going to resonate much more with your engineering teams as well, rather than a top down approach where you're telling everybody what you need them to do.
yeah, yeah. That's interesting. I'm trying to think of, like, okay, I haven't been to conferences in a while. Um, I used to go to a lot of them, and I partly was because the companies I was at had stuff going on there, right? Um, and I kind of got burned out on them. I
Hmm.
was just I hate to say that out loud.
Yeah.
Um, they may need to start going again, but it was like I saw the same things over and over and over. Like
Yes.
the the delta between events um wasn't as broad as what I wanted.
Right.
And um and also I was learning a ton outside
Yeah.
of just because I'm rabidly curious.
Hmm.
And so I was scoping stuff out all the time, being like, "Oh, that looks kind of like interesting," and it was stuff that I wasn't even finding at the conferences. So,
Right.
yeah. And then they used to have these unconferences. Um, that was a thing, maybe definitely pre-COVID.
Hmm.
But it was basically everybody would show up, and they had a um, like on site suggested set of topics to talk about. Then you could you just throw your own stuff in there, right? Like people would show up and they would say, well, I want to get up and talk about whatever, right? And they'd let you people vote
Yeah.
on what, some of them were, I want to talk for an hour about whatever, and some of them were, I want to talk for 10 minutes. And um and that was pretty cool because I got to hear all kinds of things that I wouldn't have heard of otherwise.
Yeah.
It was a very interesting experience. Um I kind of wish there were more of those, you know.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, yeah. Well, it sounds actually quite similar to what we do with our engineering community of practice, albeit at a much smaller scale, because the guys do get to vote on topics that they want to talk
yeah,
about. But yeah, it's a much smaller scale. But yeah, that does sound interesting. I mean, what I have had similar experiences with conferences that you've had. I found though, just in the last year, things have been moving so quickly that that is definitely one of the better ways to stay on top of all of the innovations that are happening. We did look at some uh, training providers. I won't mention any of the names, but the few that are out there where you can sign up your team and they've got access to a whole bunch of training libraries. The problem we were running into is, especially in the last year, the material that we need people to understand, whether it's MCP or subagents, has moved so quickly that none of the training materials really reflect what you know you're seeing on goodness YouTube,
yeah,
or you see them when you go to the conferences. And the nice thing about the conferences versus YouTube, obviously, is you actually get to talk to the people that are doing the work, and it's not there's no slick editing involved, or no, nobody needs to overpromise anything to increase their clicks. Um,
right.
but that's kind of what we're seeing with that traditional approach to training. Oh, well, they're struggling to keep up, I think,
Yeah,
with what you can see and experience when you go and you see the actual practitioners versus some of the conferences that sometimes disappoint are heavily vendor driven. You're going to see vendor presentations versus this is by engineers for engineers. So we're going to talk about engineering. I mean, that's the ones that we find to be the most productive.
I like that. Um, with the velocity of change that's going on, how are all your people doing with that? Is yeah,
I mean, some better than others, obviously. There's some amount of skepticism, and then there's some amount of, exuberant enthusiasm. And it's kind of, you got to be careful about both of those things, quite honestly. What we tell people is, in regards to artificial intelligence, you know, AI isn't coming for your job, it's potentially the engineer who knows AI that's coming for your job. So don't be the person who, you know, sticks your head in the sand and just refuses to believe that this change is real. The genie's out of the bottle and it ain't going back in. So that's what we try and do, is find the middle ground so that we've still got controls in place, but we're also encouraging people to embrace the techniques that they've never tried. Because I mean, you've seen the same as I have. The way you engineered 20, 30 years ago is very different to the way that you engineer today, which is going to be different from the way that we engineer in the future. So we just encourage people to engage with the tools and the techniques. One thing that we did recently that actually was pretty successful to try and get a bit more uh, groundswell is we found that people were having success in pockets with artificial intelligence that wasn't necessarily being spread around the organization. So we did a really, really straightforward thing. We created a Slack channel called AI Wins. And every time we heard of somebody talk about something that they've done, we said, you should post that in the AI Wins channel. And they would post about the prompts that they had used, the results that they had gotten, how successful it had been. Other people started seeing that their buddies and their colleagues were doing these things and having great success. And, it started to snowball. So it was like a really, low tech approach to try to encourage more people to see that there was opportunity out there if you embrace those types of tools. But even on the people that are reluctant to accept it, going back to what we talked about, empathy mapping, it's not because they dislike technology or they distrust the technology. It's because, like I think a lot of us, they see themselves as craftsmen, as artisans. They see that there's beauty and creativity in engineering, and that's the part that they worry about that we're not going to have in the future as a result of artificial intelligence, or they worry about the next group of younger engineers that are coming up that aren't being exposed to, the struggles of trying to find what line of code is broken when they're trying to do some triage on a bug, or really trying to understand some horrible piece of spaghetti code that somebody wrote 15 years ago, right? That there's some amount of growth. As much as we all hated that experience, I think most of us went through it at some point, and there is certainly some level of growth that we all went through from those experiences that maybe some of those younger engineers are not going to have to be exposed to. And I think for more experienced engineers that are reluctant or skeptical, let's say, of artificial intelligence, that's where they're coming from. It's not, they're not being stubborn or reluctant, or just they see the direction things are headed, but they're just worried about what that might lead to, and are we going to have a generation of engineers who aren't as capable as the current engineer. I think there's probably some validity to that, right? But it's more about what we tell people is we want you to embrace um, artificial intelligence assisted engineering in the role of don't be the passenger, be the driver, be the orchestrator of these techniques, which mean you need to understand them, but you're not gonna. It's not, for example, I hate the term vibe programming. It's not that. It's much more about orchestration and context engineering, those types of things, so that you're using your engineering smarts to get a better result, rather than just letting the machine go off and produce a bunch of AI slop, which I think we've all experienced.
Yeah, yeah, I like that. It's, years and years ago, I remember reading, and I wish I could give credit to whoever said this, but they were talking about how programming languages there's this ongoing, we're moving up to greater and greater levels of abstraction.
Yeah.
Um, and AI is, in my head, thinking about it from that context, AI is kind of the latest incursion, the kind of the new abstraction layer, where, because nobody's writing code to run in the operating system, or to run in the chipset for that matter.
Right.
You
Right.
know, that's a very, very small number of people that actually make that happen. And there's all kinds of stuff on top of that that has us get things like Riverside available as a tool for us. Um,
Yeah, there's
and s
probably a couple of guys very much like us back in the 1980s bemoaning the loss of the punch card
Right,
technology.
exactly, right, yeah, yeah. It's the world's coming to an end. We don't have punch cards anymore, you know?
That's right.
It's horrible. Oh my god,
We,
I
we,
remember.
we got through it. We got through it.
Yeah, we made it through the punch card era, and now, it's yeah, yeah. It's funny because I remember, my dad was, he was working on a master's program for something, and there some data analytics he was doing with punch cards, and he had boxes of these cards, like shoe boxes, and he dropped one time, and it was like way more than 52 card pickup,
Yeah.
and he had to like get them all sorted and or like
Oh,
uh
what a nightmare.
yeah, it was terrible. Like like he talked about like that frustration for probably like that moment in time of like I can't believe like this happened. And I think at the moment he probably considered not getting his degree. I think that was probably, you know,
Right.
that traumatic.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, yeah, and and just think, he saw this span from then until stuff we're running with today. You
Yeah.
know, um, yeah, and it's wild. I'm yeah. So with AI, like without getting too like top secret or anything,
Mhm.
what are some of the things that your folks are using AI for? Like what are some of the wins that you can talk about?
Yeah, I mean, some of the wins are, one thing we've found, I'm a big believer in the concept of context engineering as being really, the amount of context that you can provide to your AI agent, the better the outcome is going to be. One thing when we look at, we're Jira guys, the same as almost everyone else is, one thing we find is our bug tickets tend to have a tremendous amount of context already available to them. Whether it's in the form of logs, screenshots, sometimes recordings. If it's a bug that's been reported by a customer, there's probably some narrative in there. The context that is available, along with our understanding of what's recently been released, marrying those two things together with AI seems like low hanging fruit. And those were some of the early wins that people were posting about, where, hey, I use this to look into this problem, and here's what was proposed, and we were able to fix it. Another one, a similar one, was API upgrade that we worked on. We had the existing code base, we had the documentation about the API upgrade, fed them into the AI agent, and it came back and proposed what the changes that we should address. And it cut the time down really substantially. So I mean, those were big wins that we said, be loud and proud, shout about that, and let's see
Yeah,
how many other people are faced with similar situations and they can use those same techniques.
yeah, I like that. They're very tactical.
Yeah,
Yeah, and like you said, low hanging fruit like that.
right.
That's like awesome. Everybody can understand the ROI on that
Just
and go, oh yeah, that makes sense. I want to do that. How do they do that? Yeah, that's. I'm always curious to how people are leveraging AI and where they're getting it to actually deliver high value wins
yes,
versus the places that it's not. And I'm it's like what's the iterations. um I just saw a post from somebody that I can't remember what they were doing. They're super happy about the result they got, but also in part of what they wrote about, they wrote, I think he said the prompt, and part of the prompt had to have been context,
hmm,
but I think it was like 125 pages long.
okay,
And I
yeah,
thought, wow, that like, okay,
right,
at what point in time does that level of effort, you could just do it yourself and
right,
like I'm okay, maybe if you have to do 10,000 reps,
yeah,
having that, the work of that 129 pages up front makes sense from a scalability perspective. Um, but yeah,
yeah. I mean, there's a lot of talk. Um, about what they call document-driven development, which just sounds as if maybe that technique was talking about where, you know, these themes come up again and again, right? But basically, if you think about shift left, like much more of the work should be done left of programming. So it's kind of somewhat contradictory when you think about, the ideas of big upfront design or, waterfall development that we used to do years ago. It's not quite that, because you're still iteratively working with your agent as it generates the code, but, more investment being done as part of the requirements definition, the architecture, the design, the anticipated outcomes. That's where a lot of the investment is taking place, rather than, even a couple of years ago, or even a year ago, probably. I think most companies were using the AI agents as glorified autocompletes, when they were
Mm,
writing code. So, real short prompts and generate several hundred lines of code, versus it's much more about, in Claude Code, for example, when you switch to plan mode, you can have a conversation with the agent, and you're basically baking out the design that you're going to use, rather than just having it generate a whole bunch of code. So you can have several iterations of that conversation where you're improving what the outcome would be before you ever start to pull the trigger on it generating code. So, it isn't unreasonable to expect large investment, large amounts of work to take place before coding ever happens.
right.
You're using those AI techniques, and that's something that we see too.
Yeah, yeah. It's, in some ways, it's like you've got it's like having s one or multiple people who are really smart about a given
Yeah,
area, that you can work with. I started working on a book on overcoming social anxiety, and, um, somebody I talked with said they use Claude to help them write a book, right? And I was like, "Oh, that's interesting. I'll give it a try, I'm curious. I wanna go see it," right? And I was amazed at the feedback that I got and the perspective, like, everything, like, all the stuff that was happening, because 'cause I'd written half a dozen chapters already, and the it was like I had my own editor that I was talking with.
yeah,
It was a really good experience, and I'm not done with the book yet, but I'm super happy with
good.
how it's gone,
Hmm.
right? Um, and, like, the kind of questions it ask, like, "This needs more detail," like, "What are you talking about?" kind of thing, you know?
Yeah,
Um, and, and then and some of the suggestions, "Hey, it'd be better if you articulate this other way. Does that get across the point that you're really trying to make?" And I was like,
right.
"Oh, yeah, 100%. Yeah." Um, so I'm super pleased about that. Um, and, yeah, I'm very happy about that. So I'm liking the success stories
Yeah,
because, when I first started playing with I don't know, 18 months ago,
yeah,
I wasn't very happy about the outcomes
right,
I was getting.
right,
And I think part of it was because the the context that was in the systems just wasn't there yet.
right.
It's like it just didn't have
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I
the
think I think the models have dramatically improved,
right,
certainly over the last 18 months. But I think our understanding of how to interact with these LLMs has definitely changed
right.
and grown as well. So,
Yeah,
and that's just going to continue to happen, right? The models
right.
are going to continue to improve, and the people that understand how to leverage these tools are going to, continue to grow and learn and improve and have a better contribution, and be the key to the organizations as they grow and change in the future.
Yeah, yeah. I'm kind of I'm kind of wondering where I've seen multiple different pieces of content that to me read like having more of a product manager style of thinking process,
Yeah,
um, is is the value proposition going forward. Um, and which is a very different skill set in my mind than being um, the real technical wizard, you know? I've known a lot of people that were amazing coders,
Right.
not so much product manager head, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And like, what are your thoughts and how do you think we transition that?
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to the hiring process, right? I mean, that's when I talked about,
Mm,
really having good, strong communication skills, um, being able to express yourself, help non-technical people understand technical concepts, and vice versa. I mean, those have always been the things that have helped, not, forget about management, but just, leaders in general, within your engineering teams. Those have been the things that really stood out. The best engineers are the ones that are helping their team grow, right? And that
mhm,
are making each person better. Well, I mean, those are the same types of skills that are going to propel us into the future as well, because those are the people that are going to be able to master the way we need to communicate with our LLMs, or coding agents, whatever it might be, and understand the context of the business. There's a kind of an interesting tipping point you sometimes see in engineers throughout their career. Um, Most will start off as programmers, right, that really focus on the bits and the bytes, and that's what they understand, and that's what they think the job is about. And certainly, as a junior engineer, that is what the job is about. But you'll see the very best engineers make a transition where they start to understand, what do we mean by business value, right? It's not just about churning out lines of code. It's about being able to impact the the outcome by the fact of your engineering work, the way that you engineer solutions. You can actually impact the bottom line of the company, create a competitive advantage, or, increase ARR, or whatever it might be. Um, that's also about communication skills. When you're able to coach your teammates to say, well, this is a better decision because this is going to work better for, our expected outcome and the goals of the company. That's a growth that you see really great engineers go through when they start to make that connection. Wow, it's not just about the bits and the bytes. It's about all these other things that are helping us drive the goals of the company. Sometimes, we have all hands meetings once a week, and we talk quite frequently about how is the business doing. And there's probably a good split between people that just don't, they kind of check out, and they're like, well, he's not really talking to me. He doesn't really understand. I don't get what they're saying. It's not relevant to an engineer. And then there's another group that are, yeah, okay, that's the thing I'm working on. What that gentleman is talking about is actually the thing that I'm working on today. So we can help them impact the sales department, the customer support team, by doing the engineering work. So, making those connections is something that people grow into, and the very best engineers are the people that recognize those things themselves. So, I mean, there's a lot to be said for having really good, strong communication skills, and looking for those skills when you build your team and staff up.
yeah, I like that. Yeah, I definitely, 100% resonate with the, um, the engineers that wanna understand the customer value, right?
Mm.
What's the business value? And I think for me, very early on, that was always one of my questions, um, was, why and I think probably it's 'cause I started in technology. I had a very weird career arc, but I started off part-time as a sales guy for a startup, and so I was calling prospects and getting stuff set up for somebody else. Like I was early, um, now I think they call them SDRs.
Mhm.
Um, but I was like asking questions about what's what are the kind of things you want to achieve, and what would you like to have be easier and better and faster and smoother, and that you can't do today. And I got but when I started playing with code, it was because I knew, oh yeah, customer wants this thing, um, and that's what they're paying us to build. So it was like super easy to understand. And then every other company after that that I ever worked at, that that was always the in my head, kind of the background, you know, and that made it easy to. I think it also made it easy to communicate with my team. Was, oh, we need to build this thing because
Yeah. Yeah.
as you said, it helps the sales team, or we're getting a bunch of complaints about this, or this is
Yeah.
a feature that people would love to have, that
Yeah.
gives
Yeah.
us a competitive advantage.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean that's interesting. You're making me think about a difference and a change in the industry over the years. I mean, back in the days of the distributed systems. I mean, when I was a young engineer, the first couple of companies, you would write the software and then you would go on site, install the software, and work with the users to make sure it was, and probably make changes on the fly if it didn't do what. So you were really
great.
interacting
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
people who you know, SaaS companies, that's a lot more challenging, to reduce the gap between the engineer and the customer and have them in the same room while they're using the software and getting directly their feedback.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
that's definitely a difference that we see these days versus, I'm sure my age now back in the days of more distributed systems.
Yeah. I started with doing stuff on the internet.
Okay. You're a
Yeah.
lot younger than me then, Bill.
Yeah. No, I hide my age very, very well. You can do amazing things with AI and filters here. Um, but yeah, because I started really late in technology. Like, I
Okay.
think I was in my 30s when I started. Um, and it was interesting because one of the companies that I was at, like they had started as on-premise systems, exactly what you're talking about. You write it here, and then you go to the building
Yeah.
and install on their servers, right? Um, and they had switched to being a SaaS model, and 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 the guy that was our lead architect had a really tough time, like, thinking through the how do we not piss off the customers, because, like, we're gonna do a code push out to our servers, right? He repeatedly had conversations with customer support teams about scheduling, because he couldn't wrap his head around the idea that just dropping the servers at 3 o'clock in the
Yeah.
afternoon was
Yeah.
going to be a problem. And I remember I was like, and to me it was weird because I started off like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, we do code deployment at 1 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
That's always the way we do it. And that and then the first time that he did this middle of the day thing, and like all the alarms went off and the customers were calling in, and I was like,
Yeah.
"What? Like, this guy's been doing this for 20 years. What's, not
Yeah.
realizing it was 20 years in a different environment." And yeah, that was interesting. Yeah. It's funny how, all these things, like, they just change, and it's like there's so many differences. You probably remember dial up.
Oh, goodness, yeah. I
Yeah.
do, yeah. Absolutely, yeah. I remember trying to play, um, FIFA, EA Soccer on dial-up with my buddy on the other side of town. It was not a good experience.
The kids today, they just take bandwidth for granted. Like, they have no
Absolutely,
idea of
yeah,
the
absolutely,
infrastructure.
absolutely. Crazy.
Oh my god, it's so, which, it's awesome because now the infrastructure is so seamless, you don't even think about it, right?
Well, unless there's not seamless, and we had that AWS outage a few months ago and it just wreaked
Oh,
havoc.
yeah.
I mean, it just shows you how dependent we are on these big providers.
Yeah. Yeah.
everybody felt the pain of that one. But yeah, you're right. I mean, it just shows you how dependent on it we have become when that instance,
Right.
came around for that day or so that it lasted. It just blew a lot of companies right out of the water.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting, little like I'm in Silicon Valley, right? And one of the big I'm trying to think NAP, network access. It's a place where a bunch of big fiber comes together in
Hmm.
one building, right? From all over the place. I remember those going down back in the day, right? And all of a sudden there was no connectivity and everybody was freaking out. Um, and now like there's so much redundancy built in, you just
Yeah,
that
yeah.
that that can't happen, right? Um, and I just saw a thing on the news. There was a power outage in San Francisco,
Yes,
and all the Waymo taxis quit working.
I saw that
And was
story.
and they and I was like, "Oh my god," you know? Um,
Yeah,
I I can see that being a real problem.
that's
They
right.
need to figure out a solution for that really quickly. Um, just, it's like, okay, what's the balance point for all that, right? Like single points of failure. Um, and I guess, in the back of my head, just because, well, like when I started off, we had all the servers for all of our clients were in our office building,
Hmm.
back in the day, right? We had a T1 coming in and, hooked up, right? Nobody even says T1 anymore. Like it's such an art, it's
Right.
so weird that, to think about that, right? But, we had single point of failure. Like we always were afraid of like if the T1 goes down, we
Yeah,
had an ISDN line as backup
yeah,
from a different provider.
yeah.
Um, and I remember I was on pager duty and a couple times, the servers crashed and I'd have to drive to the office to reboot them because there was no remote back then,
Yeah.
and me, the distance I lived from the office actually mattered for getting hired. That was one of the things was like, yeah, you're the junior guy. You got to be less than 5 miles away, you know? Um, and, like, I think in everybody at the company almost, there was like one guy who was not technical,
Yeah.
but everybody at the company, because we're a pretty heavy technology focused company, everybody lived within, I think, 5 miles because they'd calculated that was the amount of time it took to get to the building and, downtime, that kind of thing. Um, yeah, people don't have that anymore. It's so
Right.
different.
Good. Too
Yeah.
easy. Too easy now.
It's exactly right, right, right. You can ask the AI and it'll give you a reasonable,
Right.
most of the time answer, rather than being like, I have no clue and nobody else in the building does either. Yeah, it's so advanced. Well, I'm really glad to hear that you talk about communication and growth mindset because for me, those are two of the really critical pieces. I mean, historically, I think they've been really critical and kind of undervalued
Yes.
in engineering orgs. Um, and that's going forward such an important piece, I think is like more people need to say that more loudly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Agree.
Yeah. I think that's a great message. Yeah. And you're like, so you're able to talk about it so crisply, right? Is is like everybody can understand it, right?
Thank
There's
you. Appreciate that.
yeah, yeah, I like it. This has been awesome. Thank you. I'm looking at the time and going, I've had you for an hour. Thank you.